So I believe first up, we will have Dr. Ghosh, who is an assistant professor in the Sociology and Psychology program at GSW. She has degrees, multiple degrees, from the University of Calcutta and from the Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. And at Carbondale, she earned her PhD and a graduate certificate in women, gender, and sexuality studies. So she is going to bring a lot of insight from her research in the process of gaining those degrees. And I also want to note that Dr. Ghosh is the co-director of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies here at GSW as well. So if these are issues that interest you, I would really encourage you to talk to Dr. Ghosh because she can tell you more about this program, but also she'll be teaching classes in these areas. And she has 2 upcoming classes that people might be interested in: Gender in Society and Gender at Work. And those are 4,000 level sociology classes that will really, I imagine, expand these issues greatly. So this is a nice preview of the kinds of work that Dr. Ghosh will bring to her teaching. And of course, I know that she is already published in the field, and so she's bringing it to researchers all over. So I'm going to let her, I'm going to do Dr. Dehzooei here just real briefly, and then we'll come back and let Dr. Ghosh get started. So Dr. Dehzooei will be our second speaker tonight. And Dr. Dehzooei is a specialist in economics. He has studied at Sharif University and has a PhD from Virginia Tech. And he is currently teaching a variety, I understand, of economics classes here at GSW. Maybe he can tell us more about that. But Dr. Ghosh's or Dr. Dehzooei's research seems quite broad and quite diverse to me. When I look at the work that you do, you're working in policymaking and development and climate change, and of course, really thinking about how gender shapes economic opportunity and equity. And so I'm really interested to see, these issues of gender, from both the sociology side and from the economic side. So we'll bring it back to Dr. Ghosh and let her get started, and then watch the conversation go from there.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction, Dr. Bragg and Dr. Crissett. So without further ado, I'll just talk about my work. So I've stolen this title for the presentation from the title of the talk today. So an intersectional, but I'm taking an intersectional approach to understand gendered labor, as well as how organizations are gendered in the 21st century. So here I'll be talking about the case of US higher education. So colleges and universities, how they engage in the gendering of labor politics and how they are gendered as organizations. So moving on. So the talk that I'm going to give today is basically a slice of a bigger project that I undertook during my graduate studies. So of course I cannot talk about everything, but just a few bits and pieces from here. So a snippet of my work. So the goals of my bigger project was to understand how gender, race, national origin, cultural background, or ethnic culture, and foreign-born status, they intersect. Oh, did I forget to share my screen? I'm sorry. I did? Oh.
Sorry, no, we don't see a PowerPoint. There we go.
Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay.
All good.
Sorry about that. Okay. So basically, the first goal was to understand how gender, race, national origin, cultural background, and foreign-born status, they intersect to impact the work experience, which includes workplace responsibilities and expectations of immigrant, that is foreign-born people like women, and I'm focusing on foreign-born women, faculty in US higher education at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, which means among colleagues and students, and at the organizational level, like at the departmental, at the college level, and the institutional level. And this is a study which has not been really conducted in the past or has not been done sufficiently. So the second goal is to understand the overall social and professional standing of a group of highly skilled immigrant professionals in a foreign country, which is in the US, and especially in a high status job, such as a professorship, during a trying period of time, Donald Trump's presidency. So when I was doing my dissertation, it was when Donald Trump was elected. So I want to talk about how different kind of stereotypes associated with race and ethnicities were reinforced, like produced and reinforced in the workplace. So research questions. So the first research question I had was, how are immigrant women's experiences of tokenism shaped by their foreign-born status, national origin, and ethnic culture? And secondly, I was exploring how might these experiences differ for immigrant white women versus immigrant women of color. So to talk about a bit about the literature pertaining to this topic, so tokenism at work, which includes academia as well, like what has been explored so far. So, research has shown time and over again that women and racial minorities are subjected to heightened surveillance, which means they're scrutinized on a regular basis, put under a lot of performance pressures and associated with various gender and racial stereotypes at interpersonal and organizational levels. And they are basically referring to the processes called the tokenism. So this results in their professional isolation, which in turn, like isolation among their male colleagues and white colleagues, which in turn impact their career growth in terms of making them occupationally immobile. So immigrants in high status jobs also experience occupational immobility and isolation at work, but not really studied from the tokenism perspective or from an intersectional lens or beyond science and engineering. So whatever research has been conducted so far, it has been in science and engineering when it comes to high status job, but not like a job like professorship. So that is something I'm exploring in my research. So the next thing that I found in existing research is about the cultural other, exoticization, and microaggressions at work. This also includes the academic. So one thing is exoticization. So what is exoticization? So basically, this is referring to the practices that the dominant group engages in labeling, ethnic minorities as cultural outsiders or exotic. So ethnic minorities and immigrants, when they come to a host country, they do not really have the cultural capital in terms of language. They don't have the linguistic capital. They don't know the language of, or rather the dominant language of the host country. And in this process, they suffer a lot, socially as well as professionally. Also, they experience microaggressions, exclusion from dominant circles like cliques and opportunities at work, occupational stagnation due to cultural differences, again, based on religion, clothing styles, or food habits, like the clothes that they wear, ethnic attires, the food they eat, or their religion. That also creates like exoticization in the workplace. So, however, it's still unclear how linguistic isolation is gendered and how other cultural markers such as food, dress, etc., create gendered and racialized outsiders in the academy, which I explore in my current study. So the different methods I used. So the total number of people I interviewed for my research, like the women faculty, that 33. So I used purposive sampling, where I selected a university and I looked at the faculty profiles, the biodata that was that was on their profile as well as their CV. And I read where they came from and where they got their higher education, like their degrees. So based on that, I selected who, the potential, my respondents. Then I confirmed their identities with the human resource department and approached them through emails and personal visits and requested them to participate in my study. Then after they agreed to take part in my work, I conducted in-depth face-to-face interviews, which lasted for 1.5 hours on average. The location is a public research university in the rural Midwest, which was dominated by the native population, like he was born. It was white dominated as well as male dominated. So the interviews and field notes were coded using NVivo. That's a qualitative software. So about the participant demographics. So in terms of race, I had 7 Caucasian whites, 1 Hispanic white, 5 Black, 19 Asian, and 1 was interracial who identified as the other. In terms of region of ethnic identification, I had 10 people from South Asia, 9 from East Asia, 1 from South America, 1 from Northwest Europe, 1 from Central Europe, 1 from Southern Europe, 2 from Southeast Europe, 2 from Southwest Europe, 2 from West Africa, 3 from the Caribbean, and 1 from the Middle East. Just to protect their identity, I did not use their national origin, but identified in terms of their ethnic origin or region of ethnic identification. So in terms of age, it ranged from 30 to 61 years. So on average, like the range in terms of years they lived in the US was 5 to 46. So minimum 5, 46 is the highest. And there 29 of them were tenured faculty or on tenure track, and 4 were non-tenure track. So what did I find in my work? So the first thing is they suffer from linguistic isolation. Also, they suffer from cultural customs and ethnic otherness. So here I have a few themes. I've divided this broad finding under the stranger, the office wife, and the cultural ambassador. Then they experience xenophobia and mansplaining. In terms of controlling images, I found they're seen as or stereotyped as the incompetent, the lazy, the mother, the diversity expert, and institutional housekeeping. And they also experience social and professional isolation. So in terms of linguistic isolation, as I was mentioning before, if an immigrant doesn't know or is an expert in the host country's dominant language, they experience isolation, both at the social level as well as the professional level. And my study also found the same thing. So for instance, a professor, I use pseudonyms, of course, like Agnes, who's an assistant professor from Southern Europe. She said, students can drop out of classes the first week. So in my experience, all the students that have dropped out of my classes are men rather than women. Those are the guys that don't like to be taught by the lady with a funny accent. So you can see how much, the linguistic isolation is gendered in nature. It's only like male students on a regular basis who are dropping classes of classes taught by foreign-born instructors because they speak with an accent. So also the stranger, the office wife, and the cultural ambassador. So one of the professors like Leela, who's a full professor from South Asia, she said, this idea like multiculturalism, that's something I don't like. I don't like being invited as a South Asian in this multicultural event, sort of pigeonholed in a bracket where I'm expected to get some ethnic food and wear a certain costume and show up. I don't like that because multiculturalism reinforces difference and rather makes it purely a matter of culture. So it's not about just celebrating a pluralism, but you expect ethnic women, especially, to cook food and dress up a certain way and show up in the workplace. So in a way, it's also reinforcing the idea of the stranger as exotic, like they're seen as exotics and they're expected to act as diversity symbols at the same time and show up in their ethnic costumes or bring ethnic foods for their colleagues or their bosses. Another person said, so I do have a feeling that I was hired because they feel that I will be able to get along with this guy who is the senior faculty there because they think that I'm East Asian. And culturally, I respected the seniors, the elders, and I seem to be very accommodating. It's either by nature or by culture or both. So I think that really does play into the factors, especially from the chair's point of view. She wants somebody who can work with this guy, and this guy at that time was working on a book. So he needs to have a lot of free time, and he needs somebody who takes over a lot of day-to-day operation of the major. So he does not want somebody who he cannot get along with. He had a colleague who is a white male as well, previous to me for 2 years. They didn't hire him as a permanent guy, and they hired me instead. And obviously I was a lot less experienced than him. Apparently they did not get along, so they let the other guy go and make the position into tenure track. So, combining all these things, I think they hired me because of my nationality and my personality, probably, because I can see that in terms of abilities, some of them were a lot better than I were at that time. So she is a professor, she's called Fan, an assistant professor from East Asia. So she's kind of highlighting that, the kind of stereotypes Asian women are associated with, especially like submissive, and they think that this is going to work, especially when they're working with white males in the workplace. So they are going to listen to them and do all their work that they don't want to do. So that is one of the major reasons why they are like, hired in the workplace and act as, the office wife of their white male colleagues. So another thing I found was xenophobia and mansplaining. So Leela is saying that I was introduced to this faculty member and he was from Michigan. And he asked me, where is your PhD from? And I said, I'm from X. He's like, Michigan and X are about the same level. And I did not ask, and it was not even a question. It was like, hey, I have to inform this foreigner so that she understands that I'm in the same league, that she does not think that she's better or something. Sometimes people over-inform me. So this also reflects the idea of mansplaining, where men feel the need to explain things to women or interrupt them during conversations. So the same thing is going on, that he felt that since she's an outsider, she probably doesn't know the Ivy League institutions in the US or explain them about cultural things. So he took on that responsibility of educating her, which he found really aggressive or demeaning. So in a way, it's kind of highlighting how xenophobia works in the workplace. So the incompetent, that's another stereotype here that came up in my data. So Abba, who is an associate professor from West Africa, she says, I'm here because I'm Black, and so other white people will tell me that. Now, the person I was hired with, he did not even have a PhD when he started, and he's a white guy. I had a PhD, I had like 3 publications. He did not have even 1 publication. Not intentionally prove yourself, but you will have people who will always think you're not competent. You're here just because of the way you look, and you're going to have to work harder than everyone else. Frankly, being again a Black person and a woman, and I don't know whether foreign bond factors into that, but I think initially people didn't think I was smart enough. I don't know, general expectations are not higher, but I do think my work is evaluated stricter than others because the default thinking is it's probably not going to be good. So the publication outlet has to be higher in terms of impact factor, what she tried to mean, in order for it to actually be able to get through that barrier. So in literature, it has been pointed out several times that Black people in general and women, they're seen as incompetent. So the same thing Abba is talking about regarding her experience, that when she was hired for the job, she was always like under this impression, or she felt this from the reactions or interactions with her colleagues, that she was not being perceived as competent enough. Everyone thought that she's being hired because of affirmative action, or in other words, she's being seen as an affirmative action hire. So she has to perform publish in a higher impact journal so that she's seen as competent, just like her other white male colleagues. So another stereotype that came up was the lazy. So Areta, who's an assistant professor from West Africa, she said, I think the biggest part of how my status affects my research is that just the people I work with. I work with a guy from China, and he always says, oh my God, Areta, you're so hardworking. Nobody will ever believe Africans are hardworking. I don't know why he says that, but he's a very good friend of mine too. He says they always think only the Chinese work hard. He's like, we think only Chinese people are hardworking, but you're very hardworking. And so it's always funny to hear him say that. Again, it's basically, resonating with another stereotype associated with Asians, is that of the model minority. So that is again being used, but here the Chinese, the colleague is a Chinese American who constantly uses that stereotype to undermine what she does, or kind of holds her up against those hegemonic standards and racial stereotypes, thinking that she's not good enough or not hardworking enough to be in the workplace. So another stereotype that came up was that of the mother, how women faculty are seen as mammies or mothers in the workplace, catering to the psychological and emotional needs of students, or expected to do so. So Areta, who's an assistant professor from West Africa, she said, I was not just a faculty member, I was a faculty member, a psychologist, a counselor, a medical doctor. I was assessing if a student was throwing up. So is she pregnant? And I would have to say, okay, I think you're pregnant. You need to go to the health center. I was dealing with students that were trying to commit suicide and encouraging to go to the therapist. I was dealing with a lot. And I think it was a lot because they saw, okay, she's Black, she's nice. Let me just go to her. She's Black, she's a woman. I'm just going to go to her. It was just too much. And also the same thing was pointed out by Fan, who's from East Asia. She said, my male colleagues asked me to talk to female students when they were distressed. I think that is my advantage here of being a female. I had a student who was very distressed last year. She was hiding in a bathroom, and obviously my male colleague cannot go in there to ask what is wrong. When I get in there, she was reluctant to talk to me too. She was very upset, but she said something very insightful too, and I couldn't say anything to refute that. I said, I care about you and I want you to sit in this class, even though it wasn't my class. But she said, it's your job to take care about me. It is your job. I said, well, it is my job, but at the personal level, I care about you too. But she didn't buy it. She's like, it's your job that of course you have to act in a particular way. So I was like, I don't know what to say, how to respond to this, but I think it was insightful for a student to say that. And I understand that she's upset and everything. And what can I say about that? But I think I was called on these missions to consult students. And I sometimes would do it myself and volunteer myself when I see somebody in distress, because I think it's easier to talk to me than to talk to my male colleagues. Because I'm more personable, I'm younger, I don't seem to be more intimidating than my male colleagues. Again, it resonates with the stereotype of the mother, and even women internalize these ideas and portray them on a daily basis, even in the workplace. So they were also seen as a diversity expert and expected to do the institutional housekeeping, which means doing all the work that's not counted towards tenure and promotion. Again, we have to remember the context of this research. I conducted this research in a research university. So their service work is not really counted a lot when people are going up for tenure and promotion, but more research, publications and other research work is counted. So keep that in mind because the context is different here. It's not like a teaching institution where teaching and service work is counted or given importance. So Abba said, I've had to serve on many such committees, but there are other people in the college. So I'm like, just because I'm Black doesn't mean that I'm the only minority. They needed a Black person, they needed a woman, and they think of me. So every time there were any event in the university or any committees, minority women, especially women of color, they were called on to represent or serve on these committees. So Shweta, she's an associate professor from South Asia. She also said, there have been times someone approached me because of just not knowing anybody, stereotyping, thinking of me being able to understand every international student's problem. Sometimes you get a request to do such service. Again, that stereotype that being an international faculty, you will understand the issues of every international student and cater to their needs. So, foreign-born women faculty, they're called on to do these kind of activities, knowingly or unknowingly, or intentionally or unintentionally, however you may look at that. Then they also reported experiencing professional marginalization, like experiences of isolation among colleagues. So Lima, she's talking how she experiences isolation from behavior of her students, especially male students. So she talked about, she was a non-tenure track professor, and a part-time instructor from South Asia. She said, he came to my office and I told him that I cannot make easier questions than this. I mean, I cannot, lower the standard anymore of my questions. He said, you wouldn't, you can. I said, I can't. You can, he said. 3 times he did it, and then I just turned my back and started doing my work, and then he left my room. So she was complaining to me, saying that she always encounters male students who come to her office and talks to her in a very aggressive way and suggests what kind of questions she's going to have on the examinations. Another person, Amanda, she's an assistant professor from the Caribbean. She complained how students refer or call her or address her by her first name or comes to her office without knocking on the door. So she said, so I think the rudest thing for me is acknowledging a professor by their first name, but I think it is an American thing. Of course, she acknowledges the cultural differences and she's ready to bypass that based on those cultural differences. But she also points out, I do have students who don't have manners. They would barge in without knocking. Some of them would try to call you by your first name. They come at will, whereas they probably wouldn't do to most white and male professors. So you can see how gender and race is working here. She doesn't see this thing happening with other male and white faculty in the workplace, but it happens to her most of the time. So 2 of my American colleagues, so this is Nora, she's white and she's an associate professor from Southeast Europe. She's saying 2 of my American colleagues before coming, joining her department, before getting these jobs, they were very nice, very cordial, all of that. After they got the job, gradually things fizzled out. And my feeling was that I was being isolated. like things do not belong to me. And I told my colleagues this and how it feels as a foreign person, and this is exclusion. So remember, these informal gatherings or interactions, they serve as opportunities for networking and, work on collaborative projects. So it's not like, the interactions we have in the workplace, but also outside of that, which can impact our career growth. But these foreign-born faculty, they are excluded from these opportunities in the workplace because American colleagues or US-born colleagues are not willing to interact with them outside of work. So this is what she's complaining about, that she feels excluded on a daily basis in terms of interactions at work as well as outside of that. The conclusion, so through my study, I coined this term like cultural tokenism because, as we were talking about, tokenism has been studied from a gendered and racialized lens, but an intersectional lens has not been used, especially from the intersectional perspective of gender, race, ethnic origin, and immigrant status. So I use these things to understand the processes that hold, minority people against cultural dominant gender and ethnic norms, as well as racial stereotypes. So, and came up with the term called cultural tokenism. So immigrant women faculty occupy a high status profession such as professorship, and they find themselves suffering from cultural tokenism in the ways that isolate them, while also making them effective institutional sources for demonstrating diversity and inclusion. And the university remains a masculine institution through cultural processes that create gendered, ethnic, and racialized outsiders. So thank you. I'll be happy to take in any questions that you may have.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can, yes, thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Very interesting talk, Dr. Ghosh. We definitely want to get some questions going. We'll let Dr. Dehzooei talk next, but if you have questions, put them in the sidebar and I'll try to bring them in as we go. But we'll let Dr. Dehzooei share his angle on some of these big questions of gender, labor, and equity first. Thank you again, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you,
Dr. very much, and hello everybody. Thank you, Dr. Bragg and Dr. Grissett, for the opportunity. And thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for describing your research to us. It was very insightful, and I saw a lot of examples that I would have thought I myself, how they would work. And I know it took a lot of time to gather all this data for you. I know how hard it is. So that was very good. But what I wanted to talk is basically from a different perspective. So I thought maybe I can give a little bit of background what has happened to the women in the labor force, in the economy, and what we wear, what has happened in the past century, and then try to connect it to what we see now in the 21st century. And one very important thing that happened in the past century was that women have entered the labor force in a very big way. Starting in the 20th century, women participation in the labor market was less than 20% of total women that we had in the US. It has been the same for a lot of other countries. By the end of the century, more than 60% of women had either a job or were contributing in the formal economy by doing some type of work. And this increase has happened mainly because women has tried a lot to force themselves to the economy, right? They have acquired education and they have tried to show that they are able to do so. A lot of other things has happened at the same time. For example, a lot of technology have helped them with the housework, and some cultural aspects have changed about how people viewed women in more public places. And a lot of gender norms, cultural norms have changed as a result as well. But we have changed from a country that tried to ban women from entering the labor force. We had laws earlier in the century and in the Great Depression era. There were specific laws banning women from entering the workforce if they had a husband working, they were not given jobs, as simple as that, which is completely illegal by now, right now, but it was completely legal and enforced at the time. A lot of those limitations came from this, I'd say, a naive economic view that we have to ration jobs, and then we have to make sure that every family gets only one and no more than that. And well, who would they ban? They would be women, not men, to be banned from working, and that had worked a long way. Something that happened, probably not directly from women's, but once other people in the society found out, well, now we have a world war, a lot of men are drafted to go and work in the war. Who runs the factories? And then everyone turned to women and asked them to come in. The effect of the war on this process is not something that is really set in the literature, whether it has been a cause of everything or just like a catalyst that helps people understand how women can work in the workforce. But the effect has been that a lot of women entered the job market, and people were able to see that, well, you know, a woman can also do a lot of things that men do. And then a lot of cultural norms shifted around that time. And after the war party, women continue to be employed, be hired, and find jobs in a more helpful way. And what it showed, I mean, over the course of the century, to us, to other Western European nations, a lot of them involved in the World War as well, was that, well, women are not there to work at home, just raise children or cook food and do housekeeping for us. They can do other tasks in the economy. And what was, I think, very important was how people could view and how it was changed, you know, from how the perspective of people toward women has changed. What is another thing that I want to mention along these lines is that, well, a lot of this was very helpful for women because they were able, you know, to work and they got some freedoms back. But at the same time, it helped a lot for the economy. Once we saw women coming to the workforce, it helps economy grow faster. A lot of other countries try to do that, not naturally as it happened in the US, I would say, but in a more forced way. So a lot of the growth miracles that we know in economies like China, South Korea, Japan, all of them has had fast, or they're still having fast economic growth. It has not been possible without trying to ask people to join labor force in masses. And a large of that component is coming from women joining the labor force, because in almost all of these countries, men were working a lot already, so there was not more room to ask them to join and help with the economy. So a lot of women join, and the growth miracles happened in the past century, and they continue to happen right now. And that is basically what other countries try to learn from our experiences in the US, in the UK, and in a lot of other countries, that the jobs problem is not to ration jobs and exclude women from it, but to give women opportunities, and that helps everyone else out there by helping the economy to grow at large. And well, the situation is very different from now, right? Right now, we know that no one can make these decisions based on gender and race and origins and national origins and others. Although by law, when in practice, how much of it is practice, that's another issue. But we know that at least by law, we cannot ban based on this. And in my view, something that has changed from 20th century to the 21st century is that the issue is not for women to find a job, particularly, they can, but the issue is still there, whether I can get what I feel I deserve? Can I have a career? Would I have a good workplace? And issues of this sort. And trying to connect this with my own research, something that is very much talked about these days. I'm sure, Dr. Bragg, you know about it. A lot of our students probably have heard about it, is the pay gap that is between genders, right? In the US, for example, women, full-time working women, make as 20% less than men in general on average. And the pay gap is just, by broad definition, is like that. And the situation is very similar to that in many other countries. In some it's worse than us, in some it's better than us, but it exists and we know it exists. And everyone thinks about, well, you know, this is discrimination, you know, this is illegal, people are not allowed to pay women less for the same job. And a lot of discussion comes, and the striking part is that, well, the difference is 20%. One misconception about this number, and that I think it is misleading to a lot of people as they hear it. I think a lot of politicians are also misled by this number because they don't know exactly where this is coming from and what gives rise to it. But so I wanted to break that down and talk about it for the rest of my time today. So the 20% lower pay to women in general, it's just an average of everyone, right? Regardless of who is doing what job they are doing and how. And once we control the factors that are very important on earnings, like, for example, education of the person, experiences that they've had accumulated over their lifetime, the types of occupations they do, even whether they are working full-time, part-time, and others, this gap shrinks a lot and it becomes less than 5%. I don't give it exact number because study by study it changes, and depending on how they have tried to factor in whatever that would be effective here, and also depending on the year and the location they are doing the study. But the gap shrinks a lot, and unfortunately that gives rise to a lot of rhetoric that says, well, you know, gender pay gap is just non-existent, and all those discussions that I'm sure a lot of people hear about it. I wanted to mention first, well, the gap may not be as much as 20% after we consider the same type of occupations and everything, but it still exists. And it's really hard. I myself have never seen a study that shows women are making more than men after, you know, taking into account a lot of different factors that can affect this. And I think that tells a lot about, well, we still is there, and the gap exists there, whether it's 20%, 10%, or 5%, that is there, and a good part of it is due to discrimination, and that is a huge issue that we still face in the 21st century. And also, from another point of view, well, although taking account for type of jobs that are taken and education and other factors, the gap shrinks to less than 5%. The other part of this gap that we shrink by thinking about different jobs that women take, for example, there is a very big issue there, right? If 15% of the gap that we observe between men and women as their wages or incomes comes from the choices that they make in the labor force by choosing which degrees they take when they go to school, whether they go to college or no at all, or the type of jobs they take, type of responsibilities they give at the same jobs. All of these, I think a lot of these are still being derived by the social norms. A lot of people say, well, as long as it's a personal choice, well, there is no problem there. But I don't think all of it is just a personal choice. It's a lot of responsibilities, a lot of gender stereotyping that asks women to do certain things that it's not asked for a man to do that. And you just saw some examples from Dr. Ghosh study that, you know, women are asked things to do just because they're women and not because of the qualifications, the professional setting that they are supposed to work at and everything that is there. So a great part of the gap comes from choices that people make, but a lot of it is derived by what the gender norms force people to do. Well, as an example, someone may come here and put the gun on my head and say, okay, whatever money you have, give it to me. It's my personal choice to give it to them or no, but obviously that's different from whether I would do it myself in an ideal world, right? And I think a lot of disparities that we have right now are still of this form. A lot of advances we've had in the past century, we continue to have them, but a lot of these issues remain there. And for many of these, I believe a lot of these problems go back to, you know, how we grow up in society, how norms are built, how relationships in households are built, and so on and so forth. Throughout human history for thousands of years, the jobs that were available, they required, for example, a lot of more physical activity, and women could earn more just because of their physics by working outside. And this has had some effect on how we do division of labor and tasks in households, right? Men were asked to work out and women were asked to stay at home just because of what has been outside. But now we are not there as much, right? There are a lot of changes that have happened in the workforce, and women can now work outside. A lot of women, a lot of wives now earn more than their husbands in a lot of settings. I think if everyone looks around themselves, they definitely find examples for that. And if that has changed, something in the household should change to counter that. And I believe that part has not happened yet, right? Women who work outside, they still have a lot of responsibilities at home. Everyone in most of the households that there are two earners, mother and father. A lot of housework is still being done by mothers, which has a lot of effect on how they can perform outside in the workforce. And a lot of it just comes with how we are trained to look as responsibilities for a woman, for a man, and for a mother, and for a father, which doesn't have to be there, at least at the extent that is right here. So I would say that the situation now in terms of women in the labor force, there might be some things that we can learn as other countries learned from us in the past century. There are some things that we can learn, specifically in the US, from the experiences of other countries. And that is more directly related to my own research. So there are around 200 countries that are recognized by the United Nations. We don't have information from all of them on what I'm trying to make, but the International Labor Organization, they have collected the information for 185 countries around the world. Most of them, I don't know the names, and I guess no one here knows the names. Among the 185 countries, there are only 2 countries that they don't have paid leave for mothers or fathers, what we usually refer in economic literature as parental leave. It can be given, some countries give it only to mothers, some countries give it to both parents, and there are different variants of it. but there are only 2 countries that they don't give paid leave to anyone. And one of those countries is the US. And the other one is Papua New Guinea, which it might be the first time some people hear that name. And that's very striking to me because, you know, talking about the economy, we always say, well, we have the best economy in the world. This is the largest economy, greatest nation by many different standards. But and that can be misleading in the sense that we think there is nothing is there for us to learn from others. And I believe if almost every country have got something to be the right thing to do and we are not doing it, it's probably us that we are not doing the right thing. And this can go a long way in helping women in particular and everyone in the society, the economy as a whole, in general, that a lot of relationship at the workforce revolve on for the person to be able to work for their employer, to learn how things go on, build relationships and everything, and be able to continue that over years in order to build a career. And a huge barrier for women is related to childbearing and childbirth. And if we don't have anything to protect some of the rights for them here, it's very easy to lose a job and have a hard time to come back to the job market. And I think that is an issue that a lot of women face, right? After having their first child, second child, it becomes exorbitantly harder to come back and start working, and putting something in place that helped them to return to what they were and not to be left out of where they started and what they have tried a lot to get as a status in their job and labor force. I think this is very important, and it can go very long way. In my own research, so we don't have at federal level, we don't have such laws, but some states, only a handful of them, have paid leave in place. One of them is California. When I was doing my study, that was one of the that is the first one, and that was one of the only ones that we could have data for it. And I studied how is the effect of family leave, paid family leave, on women wages and employment. And what I found, I don't go over the details here in the interest of time. I think I've already spoken here. So what I found was that, well, when women have that, comparing California to the other states that don't have it for women, the wages for women continue to rise, which is very helpful to shorten the wage gap between men and women. And at the same time, women return to work faster, and that results into higher hours of work for women. Both of them mean that women are able to contribute better in the labor market. And if we can have this continued going on, it will help to reduce the gap. Although closing the gap is a lot of work, we have a long way to do it. But reducing the gap is something we have to work on. I think we have come a long way through history, as we have changed the issue from allowing women to be in the formal economy. The question has now changed how we can make the situation better for them. The more we go, the harder it is to continue the process, but we still have to do a lot, and a lot remains to be done, in my view. And thank you very much. I'll be happy to have any questions.
Well, thank you so much. Really interesting talks to both Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Dehzooei. I'm going to make just some really quick concluding remarks to try to bring together some themes. from this research, very, very short. So what I would really encourage all of our audience to do is, if you have questions and comments, we already do have at least one in the chat. Put them in there now, and hopefully we can begin to expand this conversation to include your voices as well. So I just wanted to note myself, as we're kind of processing and thinking about the work that you've shared with us, there's a couple of points that kind of struck me that connect across these themes. One of the first is simply that we live in a society in the United States where we are often very proud of notions of American democracy, and we use a rhetoric of equality very often. And I truly believe, from my experiences with my students, that my students are very sincere about this notion of equality. And yet, when we look at the research that both of that our faculty members have shared with us, we have a ways to go to actually achieve what we say we believe in. Now, Dr. Dehzooei also pointed out that we all have something at stake, perhaps, in wanting to achieve these goals, because if we want to stimulate our economy overall, we need to create greater equity, and particularly to get women more involved in the economy and moving upward. And so just thinking about those issues, first of all, I think, I want to also just note that this shows that we are asking our faculty to do unpaid labor. Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Dehzooei are bringing their talents to our discussion, but how can we address some of these problems, but use their excellent research, but also try to create a more equitable system? And I don't know if Dr. Ghosh or Dr. Dehzooei want to expand upon that, but maybe think about that for the audience, and then we're gonna maybe come back to some of those bigger issues. So I don't know.
I did have policy recommendations for inclusion and diversity in my dissertation. So one of them was diversity training is super important for every organization, not just US colleges and universities. Take the implicit bias test that was designed by Harvard and Washington, University of Washington and Virginia. The psychologists, they designed that implicit bias test. So take it, but of course, just keep it anonymous. Don't say who took and who found what, but use those results to work on your own biases, your prejudices, right? And have diversity training. Administrators should take those, use, researchers like this, the ones, we conduct, use those findings to have diversity trainings in the workplace for everybody, and not, expect, women and racial minorities to conduct, these diversity work, serve on committees, because they are being used as diversity symbols for the universities. So you should be training even men, male faculty, and also white faculty to take up on this work, because as you saw in my research, they are constantly complaining, minorities and women, that we are not expected to know everything. Just because we are minorities, I cannot address all the concerns of, let's say, a student of color, or let's say, I'm an international faculty. I wouldn't know everything about international students. Maybe I have some idea, but I cannot address all problems of international students. If they are sent my way, then I'll be in trouble because I don't know how to deal with that. But that's an unsaid expectation, because she's international and she's a woman, she's a person of color, she can deal with everything. So have those kind of programs in the universities, so that everyone is trained to be competent enough to deal with diversity issues. And institutional housekeeping is no more the job of women and racial minorities. So that's a term that gender scholarship uses. But also, thank you, Dr. Dehzooei. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So just to add on to your research, in gender scholarship and gender work, like what you were talking about, women, and especially they have a hard time because of lack of paid leave and stuff like that. So in gender scholarship, we call it the motherhood penalty, that they are, constantly paying. So many of them, they just quit the workforce, they choose to opt out, or they defer having children or not have children at all. So that's, again, it's creating issues in terms of like work-life balance, right? So those are the things workplaces should take into consideration and be more accommodating of these basic needs, because women are also people. They also have a life beyond work, but having held them to those standards of the ideal worker, which generally like white men are associated with, like heterosexual white men who are married. So that goes against women especially, and pressurize them to work harder and not having a family, or postponing the plans of having a family. So yeah, thank you very much. That's a great research, and we talk about these things in sociology as well. And when I teach gender and society and gender and work, I bring in those perspectives. So thank you very much.
Yeah, a lot of these issues, are on the borders of sociology, economics, and women's studies and everything, and a lot of these, separately, all these fields came to the same conclusion, and adding to what you were saying about stereotyping and everything, yeah, it is very important. A lot of the profiling that we see comes, from the societal norms, from gender norms, and others that we learn, through our life, and some of them are wrong. There might be some good aspects of it.
Right.
I'm not going to say that, but a lot of that is wrong, and until we cannot fix that, the issues are really there.
Mhm.
And I think something I need to add, because I thought a lot about the policies to be there, and it looks to be the government's responsibility. I think what has gone wrong is we have tried, and governments have tried to fix this at the end of what has happened, right? So we have put a law, discrimination, right? You are not allowed to pay less for a woman for the same exact job. And we thought, well, if we try to deal with it at the end of the spectrum, that's going to help everything. And we are here, decades after that, and we still have a pay gap, for example.
Right.
And that's because we have not been to the roots. And I think going to the roots of the issue are very important. A lot of it are learned through lifetime and are learned over centuries, and it's hard to try to reverse that, in a short period of time, but we need a lot of more effort.
I'm actually going to read a comment really quickly so I can get some of the students in, but a comment that really directly relates to what both of you are saying. And then I'm going to go upward because we have a couple of questions, but we'll start with a comment because it ties in. Molly Hicks notes that you make really important points about biases. She writes, I'm a USG employee as well and have recently completed the Certificate in Diversity and Inclusion program at my institution. One of my favorite classes was related to unconscious biases and how everyone has them, even if they don't think they do. This class has really made me start to think intentionally about my own biases that I wasn't even aware of. And so I think, as Dr. Dehzooei pointed out, maybe kind of being conscious about how our norms are created and the impact they have, and maybe some alternatives or updates and adjustments. And I know that Dr. Ghosh has a lot to say about that as well. And so I definitely wanted to make sure that, that Molly's comment was noted. Now, the two questions that we have so far, and I suspect we have another question coming in down here, a comment from Dr. Grissett. Daniel Wenzel provided an early question while Dr. Ghosh was speaking about her research, and he wanted to know if you have any personal experiences that you feel comfortable sharing.
Sure. And honestly, my own personal experiences in the classroom when I moved to the US for my graduate studies, like for my second master's when I came here at Southern Illinois University. So while I was, but before that, I taught for 3 years. I'm just, saying this just to giving you a context to understand how I felt. So I taught for 3 years in India as a guest lecturer. before I came to the US and as a graduate student. So I had some experience in teaching. So, and honestly, the culture is very different. Like students do not really challenge the way students challenge here. Like challenging is good, but challenging the authority. So it's kind of like, it felt weird. I was flabbergasted initially because one of my experiences in the classroom was my second semester or first semester during my master's. One white male student told me when I returned his assignment with my remarks on his grammar, he walked up to my desk, he said, "You're wrong. I'll take this paper to my English professor." So that was very weird because I didn't think, so he assumed it's just because I'm from India, I don't know how to speak English, but he didn't know that I was trained for 24 years since the age of 2, and English is my first language academically speaking, and I don't know. So whatever, comments I'm giving him on his paper was wrong. So he needed assurance from his English professor. So I just smiled at him. I said, okay, come back and let me know what he said. So he never came back. And later on, he addressed me as "Hey kiddo" when I was a teaching assistant. And that kind of got me interested because a person like me, who I think is fairly fluent in English and will experience something like this. So I went back, I started reading the literature on gender. It just got me really interested, like to see if, how instructors, foreign-born instructors experience the workplace. And I saw a plethora of literature addressing the experiences of teaching assistants and instructors, but not much on faculty. So I was like, okay, fine. If I get a PhD, I have to stay in the business. I need to know what's going on with faculty. And then that prompted me to study the experiences of foreign-born women faculty, because literature was talking in terms of how immigrant status or race impact teaching assistants and their experiences in the classroom, but they were not really talking in terms of gender. So that motivated me to study the experiences of female faculty who are foreign-born, like people who were born outside the US, came to the US for a higher degree and stayed here with faculty jobs, or or had their higher degrees outside, but came here with faculty jobs. So wanted to study that population. So that shaped my research. And honestly, as a faculty myself now, I still feel those things that's going on with me. But because of my research, I'm more aware of, like initially I was kind of hesitant. I was not sure about what is going on, but I can see that in my daily interactions with students, like how they would talk to me versus someone else, right, in the classroom. So I don't know how they're reacting to someone else, but at least from my own experiences and with the literature and my own research, I can totally see sexism and racism or xenophobia in their interactions, like how they behave in the class. So that has always been there, but I'm glad that I am aware of them, and I know how to handle them with experience. So, but of course, my own personal experiences drove me towards this research.
Thank you. Isabel Quinn has a really important question, and I'm going to very respectfully try to expand on it because unfortunately, I think I know the answer here. Isabel Quinn wants to know if we have a disability studies class at GSW or on eCore, and not that I am aware of, but I'm going to expand it by asking, maybe we do that I don't know, and you both of you might comment on this, but are there ways that disability studies are integrated into other classes, and maybe ways that would open up some questions there that are useful. And I'll just note that we do actually talk a little bit about disability issues in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies class.
Yes.
Part of the politics there about the body and representation. Right. But I know that it's probably a lot smaller than we might really do. And so maybe the two of you might comment on where disability fits in. And if there are other classes or if there are ways to study that in the classes that we have.
That's a good question and makes me think, honestly. But I do touch upon disability, but as you said, not on a huge scale, but definitely when I'm talking in terms of intersectional experiences, I'm bringing in disability. And one of my directions for future research is to understand how disability also impacts, foreign-born people's experiences, because they're not all able-bodied, right? So how that works for women, how it works for men, like for our racial minorities, and, do an intersection analysis. So that's something I propose, but I myself, as you said, maybe I use some, bits and pieces of disability literature in my gender and work, or gender, class, or human sexuality, but I haven't really touched upon a lot. But definitely it will be nice to have a class just catering to that topic itself.
It isn't a very important topic.
It is.
Yeah, I hope we have some full course on this.
Right.
But,
And I'm constantly learning in the process when I'm dealing with students with special needs, right? How to cater to them versus able-bodied, right? So that's a learning experience for myself as well, and makes me think, like, what should we do to help them succeed, on a daily basis.
And I know one thing that I think about a lot is just simply defining what ability means. As somebody who wears glasses, what does that mean?
Yeah, in some level, I am disabled too, but
Yeah.
But glasses is something that people are more used to.
Right, exactly.
But
So
it shouldn't be like that, right?
right. So my disability has been normalized, and yet, are there ways that we can create more equity across the board? And I know that I could probably think about that a lot just in my own teaching presentations. Yeah. So I appreciate that you've raised that issue. Dr. Grissett has some comments and some ideas that I think I'm going to first direct it to Dr. Dehzooei, because I think his work directly commented here, and then we'll bring it back because I know Dr. Ghosh will have a lot to say on this as well. Dr. Grissett says, great presentations. I wonder if not all of the issue of women leaving is due to having children because of a lack of affordable, high quality childcare options. It's oftentimes more cost effective for a woman to stay home and watch the kids than to pay for childcare. So, Dr. Dehzooei, have you studied childcare at all, or do you know about the literature on childcare?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add something. That was one of the points I wrote here for myself, but I was trying to touch at the beginning, but later on I said, well, let's keep it shorter. But yeah, another part of it, is child care. Then one part of it is still gender stereotyping that if I have a 5-year-old child, do the mother should take care of all of the needs, or there is a responsibility for father? And do we need to, try to distribute the tasks, among people, which we still know that mothers do a lot more than fathers, and it could be different if we try to look at an ideal world. And another part is, yes, for a lot of families, it's very hard to afford childcare, and that's why usually women try not to work as a result of that, right? Economically speaking, if the earnings of one of the parents can't cover the child caring costs, well, the best decision is to not to pay for the cost and one of the parents remain in the household. So making childcare effective is very important, and considering quality and cost effectiveness together, we really have limited options over there, and that's usually against women. Usually it's the woman in a home that decides not to work as a result of this. Even in a lot of settings, I believe, even if the woman could have earned more than men, again, gender stereotyping results in the woman remaining at home, because, how am I going to answer to my father and my own father and mother why the man is at home, which doesn't have to be this way. It looks weird now, but 100 years ago, it looked weird for a mom to work at all. So it might not look weird by the end of this century. But yeah, that's a very important issue, and that's a very important reason for women not joining the labor force after giving birth to their children. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Ghosh, any additional comments that you might add?
The second shift.
Yeah.
Even if women are joining the workforce, they're still in charge of doing the second shift, the labor at home, doing all the household chores and things related to raising children. But research is also showing that men are, like, there has been a rise in men actively participating in household labor as well. But yet it's not 50-50, it's 60-40. So but they do more than before, but it's also interesting to see that women, even if women like men are doing more, women have to cut on their leisure time.
Mhm.
So they still do not have enough time for self-care.
Yeah.
They still suffer from that guilt. Oh, I'm working outside, so I have to do everything in my capacity to compensate for the time that I lost at home by working outside. So they're cutting on the leisure time, and but things are, of course, like, the literature is showing that things are way better than what it was, let's say like 30 years ago in the 1980s. Like, we had this book by a sociologist called Early Hochschild talking about work-family balance, talking about second shift. But then also it was like a huge chunk that women were doing at home. But of course, it's way better, I think, today. Based on what I see, not just in research, but in my own experiences, my friends, my male friends doing more, or my father, honestly. Like, I grew up in a household where my dad did a lot of household chores besides my mom. So, but my mom was not allowed to work, by the way. So the typical gendered ideology that did not, because my dad was like, no, you're not supposed to work. I make enough money for you to take care of you and my daughter. But things reversed, as you can see with me, and they broke all the gender, stereotypes with me. But yeah,
One of the kind of political slogans of one brand of feminism quite recently has emphasized lean in, that women should lean into work, right? And to show that they are capable, right? And of course, there's a lot of frustration that, well, women are already leaning into work. But I wonder, just thinking about the comments that the both of you have made, that maybe we need to have a lean in movement to encourage men taking those roles in the household.
Because this is rocket science, I believe. Cooking is not a big deal. Like, I also learned to cook. Like, I cooked when I was home, but my mom did not really let me go to the kitchen. But I started cooking when I came to the US. It's not like I had a natural ability to do so, but I was forced to do so. And I saw my other male friends doing as well, and they're great cooks. So if it had been a rocket science, a gender thing, a natural thing for women to create cooks, then no guy could have been. Look at the chefs. Even the culinary industry is gendered. Like, all the chefs are male. Right? So.
Well, we have one other question from Colin, and nice big hefty question in a very good way. So when speaking on the topic of intersectionality, we spoke primarily about race and culture intersecting with women's experience within the workplace. I was curious about any research or conclusions that has been found with age intersection with race and gender. As from personal study and observation, it seems that some of the biases have also come as women age in the workplace. Very interesting point. For example, my mother's job at a certain point decided to get rid of certain sectors and departments that were primarily made up of women who were 50 plus and more racially diverse. And I do think those are some really important issues to think about, the kind of gendered and generational experiences that come together. So I'll let you guys think about, if you have any insight from your research or any comments on that.
I mean, in my research, I did not really see impact of age. It was like very similar across all age groups. So in my research, I did not really find that, because I was taking information on age as well, and I asked them questions if their age, do you think, has an impact on your work experiences, but it didn't really. But other research definitely shows there is an impact of age. There's a research that suddenly comes to my mind from Russia. It focuses on Russian women. So young women there, they are given more preference in the workplace versus older women. So they're expected to stay home and take care of the children and cater to their, and especially the daughters of those women, they also expect their mothers to be great grandmoms and just take care of their granddaughters and stay home. So, and they're seen, younger women are seen as an asset to hire in the workplace. So I haven't seen in my research, but I've read research that talks about the impact of age for women. And
Dr.
some research, like in the clothing, the retail industry, they expect younger women to be employed, or younger women are hired in larger numbers to work in clothing stores, but not older women. So you see discrimination happens based on age there as well.
Thank you. Dr. Dehzooei?
Yeah, well, I don't have any study in mind, but I'm not surprised at all to hear about this experience. And well, there is general trends, in hiring that we see as people age. Employment drops. Part of it is generally, self decisions that, I've done enough. People near their retirement age and everything, but there are definitely gender and even age aspects to that the employers try to just cut programs. Well, this, I think they have done a very good job covering for what they have done. They have shut down the whole program, and then no one can sue them. But I think, yeah, that happens, and the extent of it, I'm not really sure, and I've not had any exposure to measurements there to give my background. But I think the study by Dr. Ghosh was very good.
So the immediate thing that comes to my mind in thinking about these issues is that maybe Colin needs to do this as a dissertation topic.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if that's in your plans, Colin, but those are really important questions. It looks like people are just signing in now to recognize that they're here for this credit. And so I think it's probably a good time to bring us to a conclusion, so we can avoid taking too much of your unpaid time here. But I do really want to come back to the point that I started with, that I really appreciate that you shared your research with us. I think this really shows that we have these vital research agendas at GSW. And I hope that students will take advantage of that, and particularly to search you out and to talk with you more about these issues, and to take classes with you, to take these issues very seriously, and to continue perhaps student-based research on these themes. So I want to thank all the students for coming and being part of this conversation, but I hope that continues, right? That you do reach out to these faculty members or continue thinking about these issues on your own, because I do think, as both of our scholars have pointed out, that these are central issues for equity, but also for our own national growth, our own vision of who we are, will benefit from, kind of that further effort to take these issues seriously. So again, thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you, Dr. Dehzooei. Thanks to all the students and the faculty who have been with us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all at either in a class or in another event down the road here.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank my colleagues who joined. I can see Ellen and Jamie to support us here. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you, Dr. Bragg and Dr. Dehzooei, for sharing your work with us.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, and thank you.
And thanks
all of you, Dr. Ghosh, Dr. Bragg, and everyone for attending.
Yeah.
And really, we should thank the Windows to the World program and Dr. Grissett, who has made this possible. And that I'm amiss for not mentioning that earlier, but that is a huge thank you.